Hi there, I'm Sarah Marie Jordan. I'm a professor at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Today I will be presenting a systematic review of spatiotemporal methods specific to the life cycle assessment of electricity generation. The work that I will be presenting is work that I completed with one of my former students, Corey Combs, and also Dr. Ido Gunther, who is with the United Nations University. Life cycle assessment historically has not captured the evolution of environmental impacts over different geographies and with consideration of temporal fluctuations. But over time, the field is currently progressing towards better doing so. This has actually been identified as among the unresolved problems in life cycle assessment. There was a Reap et al. Study that was published in 2008, which identified spatial variation, the selection of time horizons, and local technical uniqueness as among very important unresolved problems that warrant further investigation. This is particularly important for electricity generation due to the rapidly changing energy sector and that experiences a lot of regional variability. The energy sector, for example, will vastly increase specific efficiencies, change operational practices, and this can ultimately have large impacts on the outcomes of environmental assessments. And also, local environmental factors can affect not only operations, but also the ultimate impacts of these developments. So the central question of this research is focused specifically on how the methodology employed in life cycle assessment of electricity generation has evolved in terms of how it considers spatial and temporal dimensions for the decade following the 2008 study. And we do this by conducting a systematic review of the literature, and we do so in order to understand how life cycle assessment of electricity generation has evolved. This slide shows the illustrative systems boundaries for the studies that we included within the review. I will discuss how we screen the studies shortly, but this is in essence an illustrative scope of what we included. So each of the studies that we examined may include portions of what is represented in this diagram, or potentially more than several electricity generation technologies or specific parts of these systems boundaries. And so that's why it's termed illustrative. And the gray area, what's shown here, represents the interaction between the power generation units on what we consider a grid. Our approach to data collection, so in this particular paper, the data collection refers to the literature that we examined within our systematic review. We selected Google Scholar as the most comprehensive search engine, doing a number of different tests with other search engines and different types of applications. We determined that it returned the most comprehensive list. And because there were many, actually thousands of results, Corey developed a Python-based web scraper in order to extract the information about the different literature. And we conducted the search using the following combinations of terms: life cycle assessment, or LCA, electricity spatial, the same but substituting spatial for temporal, the same and including spatial or spatial temporal in lieu of spatial or temporal, and also including geographic information systems, or GIS, thus implying that there would have been spatial dimensions that were considered. Our first search yielded over 6,000 results, so 6,519. We then put this population through a rigorous screening process. So we first screened the articles to ensure that the focus was electricity generation, and this was specifically represented in the choice of functional units. So it would be, for example, the results would be presented on the basis of a megawatt hour, for example. There would then have to be a clear contribution to the spatiotemporal aspects of LCA methodology, and the publication date had to be in line with the scope that we selected. So from this, we then put the articles through an initial screening where we identified and removed anything that was categorically out of scope. This was based on a review of the title and description, and then we also removed those entries with no online address. So the studies that were selected for secondary screening, there were 558. We then moved towards a full text review, and this was for the relevance to life cycle assessment, the focus on electricity generation, and the appropriate form and publication. And by that, we, for example, included publications, but also removed any conference proceedings, for example, that were shorter than 5 pages. We then moved towards a manual review. Here, this was to ensure that all of the final selected articles were actually within the methodological scope and focused indeed on electricity generation. And from this screening, we yielded 255 publications. The selected articles were then coded in a software called MaxQDA with the following dimensions for coding: the year of publication, electricity generation type, the system of interest, the geographic focus, the type of methodological contribution, the uses of the result information. So is it input data or output data? And the life cycle assessment method. For here, we include LCAs only. I'll explain that a little bit again in a few slides. And the phase in which the resolution is employed. So that would be for life cycle assessments only. That would be inventory analysis versus impact assessment. And finally, the impact categories that were analyzed. This coding process yielded almost 10,000 unique codes across the 255 articles that we have studied. And this code data was then exported to Excel for visualization of the data. The first major categorization that we had in the coding process was the type of paper. We had 4 different paper types: full LCA, mixed method, non-LCA, which was LCA focused, and non-LCA, which was relevant in terms of its methodology. The full LCA, we included any LCA of electricity generation that considered 2 or more of the life cycle stages and provided empirical results. We included 2 or more due to the fact that there might only be several life cycle stages if there is a methodological contribution. We also included mixed methods. This type of paper might have applied, for example, a life cycle framework, or might have only considered one of the life cycle stages, for example, electricity generation. We also included a non-LCA, LCA focused category, and these were papers that were directed towards advancing methods, but there were no empirical results. In these papers, methods might have been discussed and were certainly intended to contribute specifically towards LCA. For example, there might have been a specific methodological focus on how the temporal resolution might be improved within LCA studies. And the last category was the other relevant non-LCAs, and in these they were not intended to be quantitative LCA studies. They did produce empirical results, and the contribution was relevant, and in many cases was often noted that it was specifically relevant for the LCA, for advancing LCA analysis. We also present the codes of geography and fuel type and how they change over time. So the top figure here shows all papers and full LCAs. So the all papers category in terms of fuel types, for example, remains relatively stable at 9 to 12 fuel types, but noting that the number of papers increases over time. The full LCAs, however, represent an increasing distribution of fuel type. So there is increasing occurrences, for example, in intermittent renewable energy for the full LCA category, suggesting advancements relevant to these fuel types. The majority of the country occurrences were in the United States, followed by Germany, Spain, China, and France. Do note there might be comparative studies or studies that include more than one country. Specific fuel types ranked higher in some countries. For example, coal ranked higher in terms of the number of publications in Germany and China, yet solar ranked as the most examined fuel in our sample in the United States and in Spain. Other highly represented fuels include natural gas, bioenergy, and oil. Here are our results over time for the impact categories represented in our sample. So you'll note here that there is a strong weighting towards climate change, which we attribute towards due to the fact that it remains high in terms of public discourse, media, and important events. For example, the focus of the UNFCCC. So we suggest that this is a reason why there's a strong weighting towards that specific impact category. But do note that there are a number of the impact categories which could certainly highly benefit from this type of analysis that remain relatively understudied. For example, one might look at land use or even ecosystem damage and others. So this indicates that there might be specific areas where there could be additional research that could be of benefit to the LCA community. We also took a deeper dive into looking at how rigorous the spatial and temporal resolutions that were examined are. And this figure here shows, you'll see on the top row, there is a different energy type. So bioenergy, coal biomass to liquids, coal, geothermal, hydrogen, hydropower, natural gas, nuclear, oil, peat, solar, tidal, and wind. So those are the categories that turned up in our sample. And we examined how many occurred at the different combinations of spatial temporal resolution. One of our key takeaways is that there really remains a lot to be done. On the one hand, there are a lot of specific fuel types that have yet to be examined at higher spatial temporal resolutions. But on the other hand, we do note that there has been a lot more emphasis, for example, on the spatial dimension rather than the temporal dimension. So you'll note there's emphasis in the top row of each of these categories, which has no temporal resolution. So our conclusions thus far is that the research to date has predominantly been focused on Europe, Asia, and North America, and this suggests that there are specific regions and countries that may be understudied. Second, we find that the impact categories examined were heavily weighted towards greenhouse gas emissions. And this means that there are specific impact categories that require more localized information that are being less studied and could certainly benefit from methodological advancement. Third, most publications focus on the scale of countries and sites, and this suggests that specific scales have been understudied. So there might be cross-regional analysis, and in addition to determining how results may vary across scales. So further research might benefit from focusing on these specific areas. In comparison to the spatial dimensions, the temporal aspects remain relatively understudied. I would like to note that what these heat maps do provide is they help to identify areas where future research could be of benefit. And I just wanted to end with the fact that this is as far as we've gotten thus far, but we are working towards refining the analysis with more detailed manual reviews of the papers to identify specific contributions. I just wanted to spend a minute to thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions in the discussion. Please do feel free to contact me. I have listed my email address here. I did also want to mention the support from the Johns Hopkins Catalyst Award. And if you want to know more about my research group is the Energy Technology and Policy Assessment, or ETAPA research group. And we do have a website, and it's listed right here. I encourage you to take a look, and I look forward to interacting with you after this session and throughout the virtual conference. Thank you very much.